Well, what is up, everybody? I am Darby Ellis Lewis Wilson, and with me is my good pal Chris Anonymous. And we have a very special show for you today, a very special Christmas spectacular. Oh, wait, no, not Christmas. I'm looking at my shirt. Thanksgiving. That's the time, that is the season, a time for family and friends and watching romantic comedies. And we have a very special person with us here today, Tim Nolte. A director who has directed a movie, edited a movie, done basically everything other than act in it, I think.
I didn't do everything for it. There were lots and lots of very talented people who worked on it.
Yes, yes. Well, it's a little movie called Our Church is Dating, and it is currently in its theatrical run. Uh, and I call it a little movie. I'm being a little facetious here because this movie has been a big part of your life for about 10 years, the better part of a
10
decade.
years, yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So Tim Nolte is the director, is the man of the hour. He is here to tell us all of the ins and outs of this movie, how it was developed, how he got the actors for it, how he put it all together, and how he got it into theaters. Tim, real quick, can you give us the elevator pitch for the film?
The elevator pitch. Yeah. So it's about a pastor's daughter who's sick of her dad setting her up. And so she gets her best friend, who's the last single guy at her church, to pretend to date her. But unfortunately, this happens right as he meets the girl of his dreams. So, is their friendship going to fall apart? Is it going to turn into romance? What's going to happen? And it's Our Church Thinks We're Dating is the name of the movie.
What did I say?
Our church is dating or something.
Our church is dating. Man, that's me. Terrible podcast host. Our church thinks we're dating, but we'll get into it a little bit later. This is not the first iteration of the name.
True.
And I believe it's also called The Church Thinks We're Dating. As I saw that on IMDb.
That was briefly. We tried that, and that's a distribution related thing. Why it was called. Actually, all of the name changes are distribution related.
Okay.
So yeah.
And I
can talk about that now if you want, but I figured maybe you would.
We'll get into it. We're just kicking the dust off here. I don't know if you've seen this or not, but I mean, I think your movie is getting pretty popular. I was looking it up on YouTube, just seeing, what pops up when you put this in. Are there reviews out for it? Are the trailers out for it? What's going on? I don't know if you know this or not, but there is an improv comedy troupe that I think has, I'm guessing, seen the trailer, maybe, or potentially seen the movie, and they have like a 45-minute like improv show based around the movie.
What? No, I haven't seen that. Wow, I'm gonna have to look that up. That's crazy.
Yeah. Google your movie, man.
Okay. So they said it was based on the movie or what?
So it's like 45 minutes long. I didn't watch the whole thing. The title is, I think the title is The Church Thinks We're Dating.
Okay.
And I clicked on it. I was looking at it, and it starts off with it's wedding season, and then there's like some heart to hearts with the father figure. There's hey, we're dating. Like I was clicking through it, and I was like, these are like some pretty close beats to what's actually in the movie.
Wow.
It's like, is this an authorized version?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna have to look that up. Yeah. How odd.
So anyway, man, are you ecstatic? This is, I believe this is your first full feature film, correct?
That's right. Yep. First full feature. Yep. Yeah. And it's fantastic. It really does feel good to have it out there and released finally.
Well, like I said, you've been working on this for a really long time. We've actually known each other for quite a while, and you threw me the log line once, which I thought was brilliant. And that was probably in 2013 or 14, because we met in 2012, I think, on
Yeah.
True You DVD shoot project, and kind of kicked it off there. Um, and you were looking for people to kind of come onto this project, and I was a little like, romantic comedy. I don't know. If you look around the show here, we're more in the vein of science fiction and horror. Um,
I love science fiction too, but science fiction is tough as a first feature.
well, so let's get into that. What made you decide to sort of go the romantic comedy route? Like out of all the different things that you could have picked, what led you into this direction specifically?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned horror, and horror has always been and probably always will be sort of the most bankable, like low budget indie genre. That you can make a horror film for no money, and people will still watch it, because they like as long as there's a body count, they don't care. It doesn't doesn't matter if the acting is bad or whatever. So anyway, so that's horror a lot of times is a safe bet for low budget. I've done a couple of horror shorts for like the 48-hour film project and things like that, but horror isn't really my thing, and so I wasn't all that interested in doing a horror film for my first feature. But romantic comedies have seen kind of a resurgence lately. I mean, Hallmark does what, like for Christmas they do like 40 every year or something like that now. It's
Yeah,
insane.
something crazy.
Yeah, and now a lot of other
Netflix.
Netflix, and a lot of these other whether they're TV channels or streaming or whatever, are kind of piggybacking on that. So actually recently, romantic comedies, and then also like faith-based or faith-adjacent things have been there's been kind of a surge in that, in sort of the low end indie realm. And so not quite as cheap as horror to shoot, but still, you can get something like that done somewhat cheaply. And so I've have a number of different concepts, scripts in different stages, projects in different stages of development. But then, I came up with that idea, and I said, oh, okay, this actually really fits that niche of something that you don't have to spend a huge amount of money on, and it still can potentially be successful. So that's why I went forward with that. And it's, it was something that I was more interested in life experience and stuff like that. People, talking to me, people at church giving me all the questions that you get really lots of different places. It relates to people, not just church going people who, have whoever their friends, their family, their chess club, whatever, always saying, so when are you going to get married? It's like, well, I don't know. I kind of need to find somebody first, right?
Like, I've been trying.
Yeah. Yep.
So it sounds like partially you came to romcom and faith-based through like the popularity of the niche coming up right now. But then seeing your film, you have so many homages to just classic rom-coms. Did you go on like a rom-com bender to like just deep dive, or kind of were you already in that world and that's something that you also enjoyed?
So I don't know. I hope I don't turn off the Hallmark crowd. I don't watch Hallmark rom-coms. I'm not really, I know something about some of the cliches there and everything. But yeah, I don't watch those. I'm a fan of good storytelling wherever it is. And there are certainly some good classic rom-coms, things like that. Like I love, While You Were Sleeping, and more recently, About Time is really great.
Really good. Yeah.
Yeah, really
I,
liked.
I loved all your references to Say Anything. That's definitely one of
Yeah.
my favorites growing up.
Yep. Yeah. But I worked with a writing partner on this, super talented writer, and she many things that she has done are rom-coms. Like, she's
Okay.
a big rom-com fan, and so she's super familiar with that. And I knew when I came up with the story idea that she was. I've worked with her on some other stuff, but this was a perfect fit for her. I knew she was the one to talk to about writing it, because she's just really good at that stuff.
Nice.
So you get the script written. What's the next step? I know that you did a sizzle reel. Now, was that, and you also crowdfunded the movie, which I want to talk about, but which came first?
Yeah. It's funny you say you get the script written. Well, that itself was gosh, so Maggie Hartmans is the writer on this, and so she and I bounced this back and forth. I think we started writing, like you said, Darby, in 2014, 2015, something like that was when we started working on it. And let me think. You mentioned the sizzle reel. We shot that in 2017. By that point, I want to say that it was on draft 12 or 15 or something like that. So,
Okay.
You get the script done is a multi-year, many draft process. Right. It's not just, I sat down and, but and then actually there was some like when we shot the sizzle reel, that was it wasn't a Christmas film at that point yet. It was actually set in summertime. And yeah, one of the last big changes was changing it to be set kind of around Christmas time, sort of Christmas adjacent or something. It's about the same amount of a Christmas film as While You Were Sleeping as a Christmas film.
Mm-hmm.
Set at Christmas time, doesn't absolutely depend on Christmas in the, but yeah. So we got to that stage. We shot a sizzle reel that was just self-funded, working with people that I know in my network to, staff up the crew and everything. And, and since that's short, you can do that relatively easily. And, we got a lot of people. People were willing to work for free on that, because it's the equivalent of a short film, and so we're not asking more than like a weekend's worth of work out of people. And then we used that. We used the sizzle reel then to do crowdfunding, to get development funds. And so that's a small piece of the budget. We use that for things like hiring a line producer to do an initial budget and schedule for us, and hire a lawyer to write up investment terms and things like that. And then most of the movie is equity investment. So yeah, we got investors for it. And then some of it is state film incentive money.
What I don't know if you can share this or not. What was the amount that you were able to make through crowdfunding versus the overall budget for the film?
Very small. So the crowdfunding campaign, our initial goal was $10,000, and we surpassed that by a little bit. I think we ended up at close to 12,000 or something like that. But and then the budget of the movie. So we shot, some of our actors are Screen Actors Guild, so we had to shoot under a Screen Actors Guild contract. And so we shot under basically their lowest level of contract, which caps the production costs at $300,000. So,
okay.
So yeah, 10,000, not a very big percentage of the overall.
Well, when I saw roughly 12,000, I was like, wow, they did all this on $12,000?
Not the movie, no.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Just for hopefully this will be going out to a lot of people who are aspiring filmmakers who say, man, I would really love to do some crowdfunding, make a short film or a trailer of some kind to get people interested. And you start talking about lawyers and SAG contracts, Screen Actors Guild contracts. Where does a person even begin with things like that when you know nothing of that world? You're just like, man, I just want to put my camera in front of things and film.
That is an excellent question. And in fact, it's one of the biggest problems of making your own feature is trying to figure out where to start. Honestly, so much of feature filmmaking is a chicken and egg problem. There are so many things, especially, at the beginning here, when you're trying to put it together, where you can't get, for instance, it's hard to get actors unless you've got a budget, but you can't get money unless you have actors attached, and you can't, and like that's a simple example, but lots of stuff like that, there are just so many things that are like that, and like, oh, you can't do a budget if you don't know like your locations and stuff like that. At least you can't do a real accurate one,
right?
But you can't really do it. But your budget is, but you can't get money unless you have a budget, and you don't know what your budget is unless you have money. And yeah, it's just like there's so many of these problems where you have to kind of say, well, we're gonna do our best with what we know now, go forward with it, and then adjust as we, and
that's part of selling it, right?
Absolutely.
Here's my best guesstimation.
Yeah.
And here's why you should invest.
Yeah. And in fact, we actually did. I think we had a couple of different budget levels for it. There was like hey, here's the really bare bones budget where we're not using any actors that are in any way recognizable, or just, in fact, like no SAG actors probably, and things like that, it's just very, very, very bare bones, and then the little bit bigger budget where it's like, okay, if we have a little more money, then we can, we can do a little more. We can get some little bit more known actors, we don't have any great big stars or anything like that in it, but, but getting back to your original question, which was where to start, because I feel like what I just said doesn't, in some ways, doesn't help anybody who's wondering where do I start. So, I guess I have three answers for that. One is, don't start with a feature. Like, shoot shorter stuff first. A sizzle reel can be a good way to, maybe you shoot a couple of scenes from your feature. I was really glad that we did that. Aside from that being a tool to, to help with fundraising and things like that, and the crowdfunding and all of that. The sizzle reel also helped sort of solidify in my mind the style of the movie, and certain things that were working well, and certain things that we needed to adjust. There were actually if you go and find the sizzle reel, which is probably, I think you can probably find it like on my Vimeo or something like that. You'll see it's a little different stylistically from the finished movie, and ended up, so we learned some things about that. I felt like the sizzle reel felt a little bit too sitcom-y, and I didn't quite want that. I didn't want as much of a sitcom-y feel, even though it's a romantic comedy. It's always going to have some of that cheese factor or whatever, the schlock,
Yep.
But yeah, it really, in fact, I used one of my favorite tricks. If you have a problem that you're trying to solve, and that problem in the sizzle reel was, wow, this is, especially one particular moment was just feeling too sitcom-y. So, and if you can't solve it, you just embrace it. turn it into an asset. So actually, there's a moment in the sizzle reel where I leaned way into that and added a laugh track and everything. So I was like, yeah,
That's awesome.
But that also then informed. It was like, okay, I want to, I want to go a little different direction for the feature. So I was really glad we did that. So anyway, yeah. So the first thing is, if you're thinking, I've never made anything before, I'm going to make a feature, I would start with something smaller. I mean, yeah, you could try it. I do know one person who their very first film they made was a feature length film, and it was all right. It wasn't half bad. That's unusual though. that's tough to dive into. So that's number one, is shoot smaller stuff if you haven't already. Just get some reps in. So that's a good place to start if you haven't already. Now, if you're saying, okay, I've done that, all right, where do I start after that? One really practical thing is I got a lot of just good information from stage32.com. I don't know if you've heard of that before, Chris or Darby.
Nope.
It's kind of I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of like a cross between kind of a LinkedIn specifically for the film industry. Because you can network with people there and make connections and, get work and stuff like that. But then they also have, like, a really big piece of it is their education platform. And so they get people, who are experienced doing this stuff to come in and teach webinars. And so they'll range from like just a single, like, one-time thing that's $50 or something like that for the webinar, up to a 4 or a 6 session class or something that goes more in depth. And, for instance, some of those, like, oh, wow, all this legal stuff, like I wish I had actually done some Stage 32 webinars on legal stuff, because some of those I think include some templates. So that would have been a good way to get some of those agreements and things.
Right.
But
what a great resource. Thank you.
Yeah. It's so Stage 32 really has been that's been pretty valuable. I've gotten some good sort of aha moments where I was like, I don't even know how to do, how do I even approach this next step? And then, I took some webinar on there. I was like, oh, okay, now I have some idea what I'm doing. So yeah, that's number 2. And then number 3 is kind of the just do it. That, yeah, you have to start somewhere. In fact, before I started working on this, there was somebody else that was doing a crowdfunding campaign for their feature, and I was very impressed by their work. I was impressed by their pitch and the crowdfunding campaign and everything. And the one thing that really stuck with me is he said that he just has a mantra or a motto or whatever of do the work. And of course, this is before, now that do the work is associated with, things like racism and stuff like that. But this is before that was kind of associated with that. He just meant it quite simply, just there's work involved with it, and it's not all fun. And just, and so that's what I tell myself sometimes when I'm there. There's some piece of it, that I'm like, I'm there, going, I don't, I'm eating breakfast or whatever and go, oh, this is what I have to do today. And I am not looking forward to this piece of it. This is not a fun part of the filmmaking progress. And I go, okay, Tim, just do the work. You
got to eat the frog, man.
Yeah. I haven't heard that one, but
so we talked in the beginning, 10 years, give or take, of your thing. We're talking about development here. So you have the script idea, you're working with a co-writer, you have iterations of the script, you have a sizzle reel, you're getting actors, which might get you a bigger budget, which might get you this. It feels very nebulous. Like it's all snowballing in a way, and sometimes it's going back and forth. At what point do you say, okay, it's time to bring this to the next phase. It's time to go to production. Can you talk about your journey there of, like, Like, okay, we have this piece. You know, you don't have all the pieces in play, but you have enough where you're like, okay, this is it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, okay. One of the things that I've heard a lot of people say, and I think there is some truth to it, is you know, set dates, you know, set a production date or whatever. And now you may realize at some point, like, I mean, hopefully far enough in advance, oh, we're not gonna make that, and then you have to move it a little bit. But rather than leaving it nebulous and just say, well, we're kind of vaguely working toward this, like if you have sort of specific goals in mind, specific deadlines, that helps with that. And then the other thing, sort of interestingly enough, it was, you know, once we had, so the how do I say this? There were certain steps at which it felt like our responsibility was increasing, you know? So it's like, okay, when it was just, excuse me, when, you know, when it was me and Maggie working on the script, you know, then at that point, and I paid her some, not a huge amount. She's, but you know, she also is kind of in the same place where, you know, we both have a little like some commercial professional experience, not a lot of narrative professional experience, whatever. But you know, I wanted to make it something of a professional relationship, you know, and to kind of have that accountability there and everything, and so on. So you know, so I paid her, and you know, at that point, you know, it was sort of a minimal, you know, it was me paying, and so it was my money, and so it was like, okay, well, if I don't do anything with this, I'm the one who's out money, not anybody else. Some level of responsibility because she put a lot of work into it, you know, and so it's like, okay, well, like I owe it to her to do something with this, you know, but at the same time I paid her, so it's like, well, she was paid, you know. But then, you know, then we do the sizzle reel. It's like, okay, now I got people together, you know, to work on this thing, and now there's a little extra responsibility. Then I do the crowdfunding campaign. It's like, and now, okay, wow, we have people out there who said, yeah, this looks promising. We like the look of this. We're going to give you money for it. And so now that really ratchets up that responsibility. And so that was another step of, okay, this is feeling more real now, you know. And then when we got investors on board, you know, that makes it feel still more real. Although initially, you know, it's like, well, okay, if it falls apart, we just give them their money back, no big deal. But then when you start spending that money, now it's like, uh-oh, now we can't give them all their money back anymore, you know. And you know, of course, you're, you know, upfront with investors and everything. This is part of the legal documentation and everything, that like, hey, there is no guaranteed return on this, you know. And so part, you know, it's on the one hand is telling them, we can't, you know, don't do this with money you can't afford to lose, you know. But on the other hand, hey, we did this sizzle reel. Hey, you know, you can look at my past work, that sort of stuff. Yeah, I can't guarantee that you're going to get anything back, but hopefully you can see from this that I'm going to work really hard. And, you know, it is, we're not just going to take your money and waste it, you know? And so then, yeah, when we start spending money, now I'm like, okay, wow, I'm really feeling responsible now, you know, like I need to do something good with us. And so, yeah, that was really then when we start, you know, when we had the money where we said, okay, we do have the money to go into production. That was when it was like, okay, you know, we had a date in mind. We were planning on like fall, you know, late summer or fall of 2019. Didn't quite get our investment in time for that. We had already been tossing around the idea of turning it into a you know, Christmas film, winter film. And so then we said, okay, well, let's do you know, winter of 2020. And so that was the original plan.
Something happened there. I don't, yeah.
Well, so that's actually really interesting, because you you said it was like on the first day. Sorry, this is at the Q&A that you did a couple of weeks ago at the showing that we went to. You said that on the first day of production, that's when the world shut down. And so you had to begin production on this movie not once but twice. And so what was it like, or can you tell us the process of what it's like to get a crew together multiple times? Like what does it initially look like, and then what does it look like when it's a year or two after the fact, and you're like, okay, we're going in for round 2, maybe round 3 at this point?
Could I add a little thing to that question? Exactly what Darby's saying, but also like, what were you able to get more investors in between that time? Did some drop off? Did crew drop off? Did you have to recast? Just those kind of details as well.
Yeah. So yeah. Thankfully, we actually, while we had done some pre-production stuff, spent some money on some art. We'd prepaid our caterer for some food and things like that. Thankfully, it wasn't that much that we spent before we pulled the plug on production. So it would have been a whole lot worse had we actually started shooting in 2020. But yeah, we decided the day before we started shooting that this this wasn't a good idea at the time. Things were changing so fast back then. So yeah. Okay.
So how did you assemble the crew?
Yeah. How did I assemble the crew? So, you start, it's sort of built over time. It kind of snowballs. You talked about the snowballing effect earlier. And so, then there's a producer that I worked with. We started working together on it not long before we shot the sizzle reel. And so then he and I worked together on getting cast and crew and things like that. And so there were specific people that I had in mind for department heads. And so we kind of start with that, so I start with, somebody that I know that is a really good cinematographer, and had a couple of options there, but yeah, so Lafferty Whitbro's guy went to film school with, and he's fantastic, tons of fun to work with. So started with him, and then I actually had some ideas for like our production designers. That's one thing I think a lot of people don't think about, but your production designer is the head of the art department. And so they're sort of responsible, in combination with the director of photography. The production designer and the director of photography are responsible for the look of the film, like the director of photography is responsible for how it ends up on camera, and the production designer is responsible for the sets and the costumes and the makeup and all that stuff. And so that's that's not something I'm great at. So that was a super important role, to find somebody good at that who would really have a vision there. I had some ideas. Unfortunately, they weren't available, and so got some recommendations from people. Actually, it was our assistant director was one of the other department heads that we got on right at the beginning, and so he had some really good suggestions. And so then it sort of snowballs from there. You get these department heads first, and then oftentimes they have people that they've worked with. And so, they say, oh, well, here's somebody, the director of photography says, here's an assistant camera operator that I think is really good, or here's a gaffer or grip or somebody like that I think is really good. And so, we build all of that out, and kind of getting those core people around me, people that I really trust. I know they're going to make good choices as far as who they're working with and everything. And then, let them sort of build their teams. Mm-hmm. So yeah. And then casting was, so that, on a bigger film, you might have a casting director or something like that. We didn't really have the luxury of that. So that was Jeff, the other producer, and I did most of the casting ourselves. And so that was just a matter of, posting online, contacting talent agencies, things like that, saying, okay, these are the roles that we need. And then, did a few rounds. And so that's just one of those, that's another one of those, like, you just kind of have to start, just start doing it and say, okay, what do we need to do? And it's like, if you look at all the stages at once, I mean, it's good to have some idea of where it's going, but you also don't want to get too bogged down in, like, oh my gosh, there are so many things that have to happen for casting to work. It's just like, well, what's the first step? Okay, the first step is we need to announce it. We need to have some, we need to pull sides from the script, find some good snippets for people to use in their auditions, and get it out there and ask people to submit video. And then we look at those and we say, okay, we're going to call these people out. Okay, when are we calling them back? We're calling them back, here. Where are we doing that? We're doing it here. It's like those are just all the logistical details that you have to figure out. So yeah, go through all of that, and then we actually had our big table read like 2 days before we were going to start shooting. We had our cast and crew meeting and everything, and of course we knew things. It's like, oh hey, there's this virus that is showing up in Seattle, and or whatever, and they shut down the Final Four or something. And Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson have this thing. Interesting, But okay, well, we think we're in good shape. We're going to be up in the mountains or whatever. And then Monday, we find out that there are these, people are making runs on toilet paper at the grocery store, and it's just all this craziness going. Like, okay, this is weird. And so we made the tough call to let everybody know. Initially we said, okay, we're gonna delay production, a week, see what's going on here. And then, as we all know, that 2 weeks to flatten the curve was not not how it actually worked. Yeah. And so yes, so we let everybody know, hey, we just, we have to wait. We have to wait until the situation changes. And basically everybody said, we're super excited about this. Just let us know, and we made clear, we said, hey, we're not, the plan is to still make this movie. We just have to wait until we can. And so, we told everybody, hey, we'll let you know. We'll be in touch. And everybody was excited about it. They said, yeah, this seems like a great project. We'd love to work on it. And so stay in touch. And so
had any money exchanged hands at that point for retaining actors? Because for me, something that really caught my eye in the sizzle reel was that you had Mark Christopher Lawrence, who I think might be the most quote unquote famous actor in it. To my knowledge, I recognize him as the boss from Chuck.
Yep.
Which I love. And I was like, oh wow, this is the real deal. But I also noticed that is he the only actor that stayed over from the sizzle reel?
Let's see. There is, so the actor who plays Rachel is the same. She's only at the very end of the sizzle reel. So she's the same. We did let's see. There are one or two other actors that we did keep in the movie, although in different roles. The actor who plays Alex, we actually offered him the part because he was really good. And he wasn't available. He had schedule conflicts, so we had to recast that one. The actor who played Jess in the sizzle reel, she was also quite good. I had mostly seen her in other things that were more dramatic, more action oriented. Um, and she did a very good job in the sizzle reel, but it felt like comedy wasn't quite her strong suit. And so, but we still kept her. She was she was one of the top two choices. I mean, when we did our callbacks and everything, she was still like this close, and it's so tough to like make those decisions, when and you feel awful about that,
Yeah.
telling somebody who's that close, like, I'm sorry you didn't get the part,
Yeah.
So
all this took place prior to COVID.
Yes.
Then,
Yeah.
getting,
This was
getting
all.
actors out.
Yep. This was all prior to COVID. So yeah.
Okay.
So then production officially started in 2022.
Yes. Yeah. When we actually started shooting was 2022.
Right.
So yeah. So there were a few things you asked about, like, okay, so there was some money, thankfully not an awful lot of money, that changed hands before we started shooting. There was a little bit in the way of, most of it was paying people for pre-production work. So it was actually work that was finished. Some of that we ended up having to redo. We had to redo the schedule, for instance. But a lot of it still ended up being valid work that, we still got some value out of. There were some people that, had asked for, say half of their pay up front or something like that. But in those cases, they all, we talked to them and they said, yeah, that's, I'm still on board, that I will count that towards, when you actually do shoot. And we did have, so interestingly, when we went back into production, so we went back to basically all the same people and said, hey, we're going back into production. The cast was virtually all available. So between who we were going to shoot with in 2020 and who we were going to shoot and who we ended up shooting with in 2022, that hardly changed. So that was nice. The crew, we actually had many of the same people. Some of the department heads were the same. So the director of photography was still on board. Our sound mixer, who's a phenomenally talented guy, was still on board. Some of the others were initially on board, but then there were schedule conflicts. Like when we ended up setting our shoot dates, there was another movie shooting in Colorado at the same time that ended up so they actually had been delayed also, but not as much. Like they were gonna shoot, a few months earlier and then delayed by a couple of months, and so then theirs ended up overlapping with ours. And so, it was a tough. What do you do?
Right.
and that one was a somewhat higher budget production, so I couldn't exactly blame people for taking the higher paycheck, But anyway, so we ended up having to replace an awful lot of our crew in like the final month, and in fact, even some of them ended up like the last week before production. But we still. That was a real scramble. That last week was tough, man. We and things that you can never have too much pre-production time. Don't. And with so many, there like the last week before production, like each day there was a separate thing. One day it was a SAG issue where they were like, hey, you didn't send us your deposit. We're like, yeah, we did back in 2020, and then they didn't have a record and they're like, you can't shoot because we don't have your deposit, and sort of like scrambling it, so that was one whole day gone, going to the bank and like, hey, here's the record of the wire transfer we sent, and like, what and like, yeah. And, and then, another, like, an actor who had a unfortunately a medical issue shortly before, and so we had to recast that in the last, and then the director of photography's camera died on the flight here, apparently.
Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
they say that what is it? 80% of filmmaking is problem solving. So
mhm.
while you're actually doing the shoot, what are some of the problems that you've had to solve? Uh, Limited budget, shooting in the cold. I know that you guys you had to change an entire location for a key
Mhm.
scene because it was too cold. It
Yep.
actually snowed.
Yep.
Also, how long of a shoot was it?
Yeah, yeah. So it was 19 days, which actually is for a low budget indie film, that's actually quite long. And that was something that we really like. We worked hard on the budget and the schedule to try and give ourselves more time. Because very often, like even, I mentioned this other higher budget film, they shot in 14 or 15 days, I think. Now they also had virtually every day. I think they had multiple cameras, which we only had multiple cameras on 2 or 3 of our days. But yeah, at the low budget, and normally people are shooting 12, 15 days, something like that. And so we really felt like we would benefit from more time. And since then, I actually hadn't heard this at the time, but I've heard from, some famous directors like David Fincher and stuff like that, saying things like, he will, he will do things, he'll say like, what, we don't need a steady cam for this shot, for this scene, or we don't need we don't need the techno crane or whatever it is, because that buys us another day of shooting, and he's like, I would rather have that extra day of shooting than the fancy equipment. I'd rather shoot it more simply and have the extra time. Which, yeah. So anyway, so 19 days. You mentioned having to replace a location. Well, it was actually more than that. Our original location, which we were going to shoot at in 2020 before COVID, burned down in a fire, not caused by us. Entirely separate, just a forest fire. But yeah, burned down that fall. So that was it's like, oh boy, what's are we gonna be able to make this film? Thankfully, we found a phenomenal location. It was even better than the one we had. But then, yeah, like you mentioned, Chris. Yeah, so there was one of the challenges one day was so we shot a scene in a location. It was a really great, this old rustic building that's over 100 years old. Looked great, but it was a very cold day, and the scene took place at night. And so we were shooting day for night, had blacked out all the windows, which meant we didn't have any benefit of sun warming this place. So it got really cold in there. And so we shot that day, and then just said there were some other things that, we were just kind of concerned about. Like we wanted to make sure that we were treating people well, not asking too much of people and everything. And so the next day we said, let's, like, even though we got through it yesterday, let's not make people do that again. And so, yeah, we ended up saying, okay, we're, day of, we're changing what building. Now, thankfully, it was still on the location that we were shooting at, so this is the new location that we got after the old one that burned down. And one of the things that was so fantastic about it was that we were able to just live there. We had, they had sort of a lodge up there that we were all able to stay in. And then they had tons of different buildings, this old rustic building that I was talking about, that we shot a couple days in, and then this nicer, newer lodge, and then a bunch of other buildings also. And so we were able to shoot 3/4 of the movie all in this one retreat there, including like the outdoor stuff and all of that. And so then that meant, when we said, okay, we can't shoot in this one building, well, at least it didn't mean like, okay, we've got to go figure out some other we got to have to go get permission somewhere else. We have to drive somewhere else. None of that, thankfully. It's just, okay, we're using another building on the location that has modern heating. So yeah, that was one challenge. Actually, that whole day was the most challenging day of all of them on set. That was one of our 2 camera days. We had the largest cast on that day. And we had an awful lot that we needed to shoot, which is why we had 2 cameras on that day. And the day before, I don't want to go into a ton of detail on this. That there was somebody that was originally part of the crew that we ended up, before we started shooting, we ended up letting go because it didn't seem like it was going to work out, and getting some red flags and things like that. And I don't know whether they were vindictive or what, but anyway, they did some things that from our perspective, it felt like they were really trying to cause trouble, trying to basically sabotage the shoot and make it fail. And so, as part of that they raised some issues with the Screen Actors Guild, which were all misunderstandings. None of them
in the vein of any good rom-com.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But because of that, then the Screen Actors Guild started, really like they made a bunch of changes, in terms of what they wanted us to do for various things, and so while and so we had to, on this day that that was one of the most challenging days of the shoot, was when they implemented those, and so we had to do they added a bunch of extra COVID precautions that we had to do. They had approved our COVID precautions before, but then they said, well, no, actually, we're going to make you do all these extra things. And, so we had that ate up a bunch of time in the morning. And so anyway, so this day that we already knew was going to be a long day, we ended up losing like half of it at the beginning, because of all these things.
You just got under the microscope, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. And so they made all these, just all these extra things, all these extra hoops that we had to jump through. So that, that was it was a super challenging day. And if there was one day I wish that we could go back and reshoot, that's the one that I would want to reshoot, because you can tell there are places where we didn't get the coverage that we wanted. We still got enough to put the scene together,
right?
Or the multiple scenes. It was a few scenes, but there were some sacrifices. We didn't get quite the all the shots that I wanted. Didn't have time to really dial in the various different things and stuff like that. So.
Well, so 19 days, which is a lot for, as you're saying, for an indie film. You have a tight schedule. What kind of leeway does that give you for how many times you run a scene? How many you getting 3 takes? I'm sure it depends on each, hopefully one and done, right? Or you get coverage or whatever, but I'm sure some are more challenging, but in general, what kind of where as a director, where you've got to make that decision of like, that is good enough, it's not bad at all, it's good, we are moving on, right?
Yeah. And there definitely is that, and it's always this constant sort of balance between, is it really good enough, or do we, which things do we really like, do I really stick to my guns, like, no, we need to get this, like, even if it means sacrificing something else, and which things is like, no, that was good enough, it's not that important. So that's a constant question running. How many 3 takes was kind of a common goal. that was sort of that was kind of like in our mind, like, okay, we would like to be around 3 takes per shot.
Okay, cool.
There were definitely some that we were higher than that, and then
Mhm.
there were some that we were lower than that. One of the things, with casting, it was we worked really. I was glad that we spent the time that we did, and that we were as careful as we did getting good actors, who were very good, who were very natural, who really, they really had the fundamentals of acting. If an actor doesn't know their lines, well, now you're spending takes fixing that,
Right.
Right.
And so, it's like, so we were just, we were blessed enough to have actors that, like, in the audition, I was like, if that had been the take, I would have been happy with that. If that had been
Nice.
the performance, that,
That's
so it was
awesome.
like getting actors that, like, the first take, I was like, okay, that,
Yeah.
in general, it was like, that was a good take, because there are invariably technical things, that go wrong. And
Right.
so, um, so yeah, that, then sometimes there are things, we certainly had, our share of takes that went, 5 or 6 of shots that went 5 or 6 takes or something like that. And, there were a few that went more than that, but it's, trying to shooting for the edit helps with that, where we're trying to keep it, not just like, oh, let's just get lots of coverage, but like, okay, what do we actually need, so that then say, okay, I'm going to use the wide shot for this. I don't, and I know we got it good there. So I don't, or I'm in the wide shot, and you know what? This particular part wasn't great in the wide shot, but that's okay, because I'm not going to use, I know we're going to go into close, because, this is an emotional part. And so I don't need to have, a perfect take in wide. I just need to make sure that we get it, in close. So.
Do you feel, because you were also the editor, going into it, that helped you directing, like for the edit, like you're talking about?
Yeah. So I didn't actually plan to be the editor.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But certainly having experience editing helps. I mean, I think one of the good descriptions of, of what a director is they're the on-set editor. They're the
Right.
one they're editing in their mind.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that is, even though I didn't plan on editing it originally, certainly having experience with editing definitely was helpful,
Okay.
because then I knew kind of how it would piece together, and I could visualize, what pieces were going to go where.
Well, let's move into that a little bit more. You've done your production. You have everything in the can. The actors have gone home. The crew has gone home, and it's time to start putting everything together. Well, first, yeah, let's get into. You didn't plan on being the editor, but how did that happen? What's the
Yeah.
story behind that?
Well, I mean, the short version, like a lot of other things, I guess, is that, when it's a low budget indie film, and something people have said to me before, and it's definitely true, and it's a tough pill to swallow, but nobody will care about your movie as much as you do.
Yeah.
And so, so sometimes, it's that do the work thing again. Sometimes there are things that come up, and it's like, I don't know how this is going to happen unless I do it. So I have to do it,
So where do you start?
Yeah.
You have just all of this footage. I mean,
Yeah.
I assume hours and hours of footage.
Yeah.
What's
Oh,
what's
yeah.
the
Yeah.
beginning point?
I'm trying to remember. At one point I did look at how much footage it was, and I had the shooting ratio, and I can't remember what it is right now. But anyway, yeah. As far as editing, though, I actually did have another editor in mind, but he unfortunately was, when we got ready to edit it, he was booked on too many other things, and so we weren't able to do that. Had a few people audition. I edited the scene that we used sort of as an audition edit myself, just to see what was possible with it. You know, I wanted to see what the problems were that they would run into and everything. And then we did, you know, did sort of a blind ranking, you know, had some other people look at the different edits and rank them. And mine ended up winning. So that it was like, well, okay, I guess.
Well, were you the one voting?
No.
Okay.
No, I did
this
not
one's
vote.
pretty good.
Yeah. Nope. I had other people vote. Didn't tell them who did which edit. Yeah, I would just. I think what did I do? Yeah, we named the edits. I wanted something that was like, well, if I give them letters or numbers, that's going to like imply that one is better than the other. And so I ended up giving them the names of planets, I think, because I was like, okay, well, that hopefully won't like have an implied, you know, like this is better, you know. And I didn't use Earth because I was like, okay, that would be.
They actually chose Pluto, but then we realized it wasn't a planet.
Right, yeah.
We had to eliminate.
Disqualified.
Yeah. So anyway, so then there were good and bad things about it. You know, the best thing was that because it is my project and nobody's going to care about it as much as I do, that meant that I was willing to put longer hours into it than anybody else would have. And so I was willing to keep working on it. If I had ever done the math on what the rate was that I was making, would have been ridiculously low, but you know, but you know, there was money to pay myself in the budget because I had to eat and pay rent, you know? But anyway, yeah, so I did the edit. Well, okay, aside from that one scene, so that was the first thing that I did. Like I said, because you know, just trying to see what could be done with it, and we use that as sort of, you know, editor trials. But then after that, I pretty much started from the beginning and went straight through. Yeah, which
is very linear.
Yeah, I did it pretty linearly. I mean, you know, for an initial pass, you know, and then I went, you know, watched it, you know, made my own, you know, and got feedback from other people, went back and, you know, and went through again, you know, taking the feedback into account and everything. But yeah, I did do it fairly linearly. I don't know why. I guess I'm just a linear guy.
Yeah,
it's kind of how stories are told. So I bet.
Yeah. That was, and it's interesting. You could, you know, that initial edit that I did, and then, you know, giving it to people, and I only gave that initial edit to people who had experience making films, because I knew people who didn't. That, you know, it's hard to look past all the things that aren't there.
Right.
You know, that the sound isn't polished, the color isn't polished, you know, all those sorts of things. People just, you know, who, if they're not familiar with it, they get bogged down in that, and they don't even realize that's what's bothering.
Right. You could tell them from the get-go, hey, don't worry about the sound right now. And then your first note is, the sound is kind of.
Yeah. Or sometimes they'll say things like, oh, well, this was really jarring. And you look at it and you go, oh, well, that's just because there's a color mismatch there. That'll get fixed in grading. But they don't know that, you know? Right. So, So yeah, so, you know, showing it to people who have some experience, and so they know, you know, what sort of feedback we need. But I could tell, like, most of the notes were at the beginning, and then there were fewer and fewer notes as it went on. And I think a decent part of that is because I got better editing it as it went, you know, and I edited start to finish. And so by the end, it was like, oh, I've edited most of a feature now. I'm getting good at this, you know. Or
you did the work.
You know? Right? Yeah.
So, the editor versus the director and you, were there any scenes that whole scenes that just ended up on the cutting room floor?
Yeah. Boy, good question. Let me think about that. I mean, that is the reason that I initially didn't plan to edit it myself. You know, I wanted, you know, and the guy that I had in mind is a very good editor, you know, and I wanted a different set of eyes on it, because I didn't want to have that tunnel vision where you know, where I couldn't see it in different ways, or I couldn't see the problems that were there, and, you know, and make the tough choices. Let's see, you know, it's funny. There was a scene that got, let me think here. There was a scene that got cut from earlier edits of the film that I actually ended up putting back.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, which scene, if you don't mind me asking? Or...
Yeah. So okay, so it's in the first act. It's when after the big wedding montage at the beginning, and then when Alex, I call that sequence the relationship debates sequence. Where Jess and Alex are going back and forth, and Alex is the hopeless romantic, and he's going on and on about how he's, oh, romance is great, and Jess is going like, you're gross,
Right.
She's the curmudgeon or whatever. And so that whole sequence there, in the middle of it, so it starts out with them in the florist shop where they're getting like flowers and decorations together for Rachel's wedding. And then after that, it goes to them loading up the pieces of the stable onto the car. And then it goes to them driving up to the mountains, up to the where the wedding takes place. And it's kind of one continuous conversation that continues through all of those. And the middle part, I really was feeling at that point like the movie was dragging. Like I could feel it as I was watching that. I was like, it just feels like it's not moving along like it needs to. And so I cut the middle part of that out. I cut them loading up the stable onto the car. And which actually meant we lost some of the, if you remember the gag with the flannel graph, the felt characters animated on there, where we had like Adam and Eve and stuff like that. So that went away. And so, I showed it to people that way. I felt like it did help it move along better. But then I did have some, like, for instance, some of the actors, and of course you have to take this with a grain of salt because they know what's there, and it's better to, if you can get feedback from people who don't know what's supposed to be there,
right.
Because if you know what's supposed to be there, then you go, oh, how come that's not there? But if you don't know, then you don't know what you don't know. So
right.
But some of them said, well, I kind of missed that. I felt like that helped establish their characters a little bit more. And it did. There are some important thematic things there. Like it really establishes in that scene sort of their different, that particular bit right there really has a couple of very sort of like that has the lines where the theme is sort of stated outright.
It does.
Like where Jess, Jess says, not all love is romantic. And that's one of the key themes of the movie. And so it was kind of a bummer to lose that. And so, but then, I got some good feedback on some other places where like, oh, hey, you can tighten this up here. And, so I went through just really fine-toothed comb. Actually the writer, Maggie, gave me some really good feedback on a lot of that stuff. And so went through, and in some cases, boy, it's amazing. Like comedy the timing is so critical in comedy, it was a matter of cutting out like a few frames and all of a sudden something went from not being funny to being funny,
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah. And so just doing that in a whole bunch of different places, so like there weren't any great big, between that first edit and the second edit, there weren't any massive cuts. There weren't any like, oh geez, this has just got to go,
Right.
But it was just a lot of those little just tightening stuff up here and there, and that made a huge difference in how the pace of it felt, and it ended up being total over the course of the film, it still wasn't that much. It got maybe 3 minutes shorter or something like that
from your original, from your first edit to your final one is 3 minutes. Wow.
Okay,
nice.
Not much different.
That's a lot of single frames to cut.
Yes. Yeah. It was really a lot of being just very super attention to detail, like this this just needs to be tightened up just that much, and okay, there, now it's working. So
Cool.
yeah,
Nice.
I mean,
Well,
I was going to say, honestly, it's the fact that there weren't there were some edits that we made before shooting. Like right at the end, it was like, okay, this is like, just looking at it and realize, yeah, you know what? This is not going to survive the edit. Looking at it like
So why
that.
even shoot
We
it?
need yeah. So why
Yeah.
are we shooting it?
Yeah. Yep.
yeah.
But yeah, I'd have to look back. I don't, other than that one, which, like I said, it took out that I did shorten the driving scene after it, and that helped. I think with although not much content went away. I think I really just tightened it a lot. There's a little content that went away there, but I really just tightened it.
I like that technique you used there, where you've seen it in many movies where you have one conversation going over movement, right? Like that's a really, really slick device that, I mean, I think you did a good job with things like that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it really is a testament to, like, Maggie's writing is very good because, and I told you before, draft 12 or whatever, when we shot the sizzle reel, it was, our shooting scripts was draft 20, I think.
Okay.
Now that doesn't mean it was a page one rewrite
Right,
20 times,
Right.
but that many times, going back and making revisions and tightening. And yeah, it just, so it really meant, by that point, it was a really nice, tight script. The script was working very well, and and she's such a good writer that, yeah, it meant by the time we got to the edit, that the stuff was working on the page. We made sure it worked on camera, and so generally it worked in the edit.
Write for the edit, shoot for the edit.
Yep.
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 Total side note, did you try any other holidays out? Did you shoot like a Valentine's Day version? Like, not shoot it, but did you bat it back and forth with your co-writer?
We did talk about it a little bit. We talked about some different ideas. There was a little bit of that's a little bit of the sort of the producing and business side of things, that well, hey, if we set it at a holiday, then that can sometimes give you a little bit of a niche there. Or it's, it becomes a thing that people then watch, year after year or something like that.
Yeah.
And so, we tossed around the idea, like, oh, hey, what if we go with a holiday that's not very often used, and then it can be like the definitive Thanksgiving film or something,
Right, yeah.
But yeah, ended up not, never really did any major writing in that vein.
Okay.
Like I said, originally it was actually set summertime, and it wasn't even set around, well, I think sort of fall or something like that. And it wasn't even set around any specific holiday. It was just, that was a later addition, like I said, because of initial scheduling. When we ended up getting our funding in place, just the time is right for shooting in winter. And so I made some changes to make it winter. And so many of them felt so natural. Like they felt like it ended up not feeling like we were shoehorning it into a Christmas film. Like it felt they felt like natural changes that added some depth and some extra meaning to it. And so I said, yeah, you know what, let's just leave it this way.
Cool.
After COVID, since we stopped shooting, we could have said, okay, well, let's go back to the original plan. But we said, no, these were actually improvements. So let's leave it set at Christmas time.
Cool.
So you're doing the edit. What's next? I assume it's sound, but are you doing sound design as you're going with the edit? Like, is that being developed kind of alongside, or did you finish the edit first and then you put it in for sound design and then eventually scoring? And
yeah, I did, like, as I was editing, I did occasionally do some rough sound design, because sound is such a huge part of every film. It's saying that video is 2/3 audio, and especially comedy. Like, there's a lot of sound is really important in comedy, and so there were a lot of places where I did kind of rough in some sound design to make sure, like, hey, is this working here? Because and that was another thing that often would make the difference. Like, okay, without the sound, it's kind of you know, and then you
Yeah.
put the sound in, and it's like, oh, hey, it's funny now, you know. So yeah, I roughed some of that in. I would do that in place, you know, like I said, in places where I was like, what is this edit actually working? You know, if I was like, okay, I think maybe this is working, and the reason that it's not quite working is because it's missing sound, or the reason it's not quite working is because there's a color mismatch here. So I'm going to do a rough, you know, on these two shots, I'm going to quickly like do a rough match between them and see if that fixes what looks like a broken edit, you know.
Yeah.
And then in fact, you know, I mentioned these, you know, getting feedback on it, you know, okay, so that first stage, I hadn't done much of that, and I was just showing it to people who had the experience to look past it. But then, you know, after the next pass, I showed it to some people who, you know, did not have so much of that experience. And so for that, I knew, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to do some degree of, you know, so I did do some evening out of sound and some sound design and some, you know, sort of a quick color grading pass and everything, you know, so that there weren't things that just jumped out and would pull people out of the movie while they're watching it. So I could get a better sense of how audiences, you know, would receive it at that stage. So yeah, that was kind of, and that, I guess, you know, that's one of the advantages of wearing many hats. And, you know, that I was, and having done a lot of, you know, small projects myself and everything like that, you know, that I had the ability to kind of at least rough some of that stuff in. And then, yeah, you know, so feedback again at that stage, you know, made some more changes there. And yeah, then after that, you know, I was trying to get it to an edit lock, because then, you know, I was turning it over to, you know, so I did not do the final audio myself. I knew I was not like, I need somebody who's a good, you know, who's an audio pro to do that stuff. I like, you know, I can do well enough for a little commercial video or a, you know, a YouTube video or something like that. But nah, if we're making a feature film, I want it to be, I want it to be better than that. You know, but of course they can't really do that until, you know, they want to know, like, this isn't going to change a bunch. That's a really hard thing to do for, you know, like it's hard to say, okay, it's not changing anymore. We're not changing the edit. You know, it's so, and so, and frankly, there were actually a couple of small changes that I still made. You know, had I not been the editor, that probably wouldn't have been possible. You know, for one thing, you know, I would have had to pay the editor more, but because I'm the editor, I'm like, well, I'll just do it. You know? And, you know, and then it also meant, you know, I know the audio guys weren't super thrilled with that, but I tried to make it as painless as I could for them, you know. So I was giving them very precise, like, edit decision lists, you know, and keeping those changes minimal. You know, what I gave to them was very, very close to what was final. You know, there were just a few places, you know, it was like, oh, hey, I ended up, you know, this shot here, I shaved 6 frames off or something, you know, and there are half a dozen places where I did that, you know, and so I just give them a list of, like, here are the changes that I made. And so, you know, even though they don't love having to go back and after they've already done some audio stuff, at least in that, you know, and they mentioned this to me, they were like, thank you for giving us really detailed notes about this, you know, that they didn't have to try and figure out what I did. You know, I was, you know, of course I had to keep close attention then while I was doing that. You know, I had to go through and, you know, when I was like, okay, I'm making an edit here. And then I put a comment on the, you know, on the timeline. Okay. I cut off this many frames here, you know?
So to get a little more in the weeds on that, did you have to do much ADR where you have the actors come in and re-record lines, or was it a lot of just the on-set audio that you recorded? Or
so by and large, it's on-set audio, which is that I told you we had a fantastic sound mixer. Like he's really excellent. Isn't Marcelo Lessa? And he's a friend of mine, and he was super generous with working on the film and everything. He did sound on the Oscar-winning documentary Citizen 4 from a few years back about what's his name, Snowden, I think. Is that documentary about Edward Snowden? And he's done a lot of other like he's an experienced, talented guy. So it was, and it shows. Like, he got, actually the audio post people commented on that also. They listened to it and they're like, wow, this is really high quality sound that you get, because they're so often, even from higher end productions, he said, we get sound that's just not great. So yeah, he did a really good job there, and I'm super thankful, because that meant that the audio post didn't have to be super expensive. Our ADR list ended up being the two leads, there was like a page or so for each of them, something like that, so not very much. And couple other lines here and there. We re-record for the Sam, the groom who sings on camera, that we didn't get, we kind of knew, we're not, well, because that was the day that was cut super short, and so we just didn't have the time to get really, do everything we would have needed to get a really good clean audio recording of him singing and playing on set there. So we did record that, re-record that later. But yeah, it really pretty minimal ADR. We also made some use of, we were able to use some AI tools. That was actually really interesting, seeing, like I saw stuff change in the AI world in post very dramatically, just from when I started post to when I finished it. Like, there were times, for instance, where, all that stuff is changing so quickly. I would look at something and I go, I wonder if there's a tool that can solve this problem that I have here. And I go looking and I go, there's not really anything there yet, and then I keep working on the edit or whatever. And then I come back to it 2 months later and go, oh, hey, there's a tool that does that now. So
just wait a little bit.
Yeah. So actually, there was one really cool way that we were able to. There were a couple of places. So some of the ADR was because we didn't have clean audio on set. That was rarely the case. Many of the ADR lines were actually, we needed. It was a change in the line. Because there was something that wasn't coming across properly, or there were a couple places where, like, the actor, one or two, where they said the line slightly wrong, which normally is not a big deal, but in one case it ended up not like setting up a following line properly. Right. So it's like, well, we've got to change that, and of course unfortunately I missed it on set, but but then just like a few places where it was like, okay, here's something that, like, the audience isn't getting this, like that was something, like, it was super. I've found test screenings to be very valuable, and getting feedback on those, and just finding places where, like, okay, the audience is not understanding what they need, what I need them to understand there. And so then figuring out, okay, can I change a line that will give them the information that they need? And then using some of these AI tools, I was able to then train a voice model with the actor's voice and experiment with different lines.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I could try a bunch of different lines, drop them in there, and see, like, okay, how does this work? How does this work? How does this work? And then in the, in a test screening, I could, okay, I think this is going to be the one, so I put that into the test screening there and let it play, and like, oh, hey, lo and behold, that fixed the problem. I don't have people, giving me this feedback about such and such is confusing anymore. Okay, great. All right, now I know what the line needs to be. I can go to the actor and say, okay, here's the line I want you to re-record, so that was super helpful. There were a few places where we actually ended up using those in the final edit, because it was able to do things like match the particular acoustic characteristics of the set better.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Man,
anyway,
that's
yeah,
crazy. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So yeah, there were some places, I tried not to, yeah, a lot of people, of course, are very concerned about, like, oh, AI, it's going to take everybody's jobs away, and I get that concern. And yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want to do, I don't want to use this to replace, these, the work of these people or anything like that. So I tried to use it in ways that sort of, that empowered us to do new things, gave us some flexibility or what, but not ways that was just like, oh, well, I'm just replacing a person here,
Yeah, it's like in music, pitch correction rather
Sure.
than just having it create the music whole cloth, right?
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yep.
I could see
Yep.
that being really helpful in a comedy situation, like you're talking about, just trying different lines to see how they land before going back to that actor. I think it's how you use the tools where they can be exploited are beneficial, and I think that's a really smart way you used it. That's cool.
Thanks.
So, with the onset audio, uh, when I assume they're all recorded. That's all recorded to a different device, right? It's not
Right.
on
Yep.
on
Yep.
camera audio. So when you're going through and doing your edit, um, are you trying to get all of that the good audio lined up with it, or are you handing that over to someone afterward and say, all right, here's all the takes that I used for each scene, line it up please?
Right. Right. Yeah. So, no, yeah. So I'm when doing the edit. So the first stage actually was syncing, like even so there's ingesting, so we've got somebody on set, whose job it is to take in all the footage, make sure it's backed up and everything like that, is the
Mhm.
DIT, or data wrangler. DIT is digital information technician, but it was so she was really good at that. And it was funny because I have done that before and I don't like it, because I always feel like there's a party going on in the house somewhere else, and I've been put into a closet and told, like, you have to stay here. You
Yeah,
can't come and join the party.
you got to do
And
this
so,
tedious thing.
yeah. so so I'm always I'm very hesitant to, like, I'm like, are you sure you really want to do this job? And she's like, no, it sounds great. Like, I don't want to, like, I'm an introvert. I don't want to be around the, very detailer. I was like, okay, fantastic. Dude, go for it. Yeah. So anyway, so that's important on set, getting some of that initial organization. And then after that, there's organizing stuff based on, and some of that, because we have the good, electronic slate and everything like that, that's, our onset, sound production sound mixer is capturing take numbers and everything on that. So that nicely comes in with all that stuff already labeled. So that helps a ton. And then the very, very first thing is syncing the video with the audio. Which thankfully, so again, with the nice equipment here, so we were using timecode sync there,
Okay.
and so our the sound engineer has timecode generators that then send the same timecode both to his audio recording and to the camera, and so then all you have to do is tell the computer match those timecodes up. And so, yeah, I got a tool that actually is able to do that to a whole batch at once, thankfully. Like, in the software itself, I can take a pair and say, okay, match these by time code. But when you're talking about a feature's worth of shots, 2,000 shots or what, 1,000, I think actually is what it is about. Well, 1,000 in the finished film. So counting all the takes, yeah, it's several thousand. That like that'd be really tedious. Like, that would have been a week or more of work going through and doing that. So anyway, I found a nice tool that will do that a batch, and so I did a day at a time, and it lines it up. So yeah, thankfully I don't have to do that. And so then that's what I'm editing with, is those things that are already synced there. And so then when I hand that over to the sound people, they already have the good sound already lined up there. all of the tracks for that. And then they're choosing, okay, which channel, because we've got a lavalier mic on everybody, and then we also have a shotgun mic and a boom pole. And they're choosing which channels to use and everything. But
nice.
Yeah.
Well, so I won't ask you anything about film scoring. We have an awesome interview with Andrew Scott Bell from Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2, who explained a lot of that for us. So let's fast forward a little bit to when do you know that you're done with post-production? Like when are you like, okay, this is it, this is what we're going to show, and now we got to get our movie out to people, we got to get our audience, we got to do our testing for the name. I want to get into that. When do you move into that next phase?
Yeah. So you're done with post-production when the distributor says to you, you need to give us a master today or we're not going to hit our release date. Well, yeah, there's a saying, and I can't remember. It's probably been attributed to all kinds of different directors, Hitchcock or whatever. But the saying is something like, films are never finished; they're abandoned. And I think there really is some truth to that. You could always do more. So at some point you just have to decide it's good enough. And a lot of times it's deadlines that make you make those decisions. And I mentioned the audio, like, okay, well, they need the edit can't be changing around a bunch when they're and then when the colorist is working on it, like, okay, same deal, we can't be changing the edit a bunch, and so like that means that's locked in there. Okay, our timing is locked in. We can't change that, and then it gets to like, okay, now we've got to get this off to, well, say for color, like, okay, the visual effects have to be color graded, so the visual effects have to be done for me to send it to the to the colorist, and then last of all, like I said, you send it off to your distributor or whatever, and now it's like, okay, this is it. This file I'm sending them now, that's what's going to be shown in theaters or on streaming or whatever. So yeah, as far as like, how do you know? For me, that's how you know. It's like, and you go, I gotta get it. This is my deadline. I've got to get it here. Yep. Aside from that, of course, the test screenings and things like that are super valuable. With is when the first large test screening that I did, when I could tell that everybody was just staying very engaged throughout, that and then the feedback I got afterwards, same thing, that, people saying, oh yeah, they didn't notice the time passing, that sort of thing. They just, the movie played and they were like, oh, and so that was it was like, when I got to that, it was like, okay, yeah, we're definitely close. We're very, very close here.
How many test screenings did you end up doing?
Let me think. Okay, so there's like the initial, so there was that initial sending it to a few people, like I said, so not really test screenings, but sending it to a few people that had some experience. That was like kind of the initial round. Then I went back and did edits based on that. And so it was, let me see. Actually, after that, I did kind of a small test screening with like, it was some people some friends that I was spending New Year's with. And so I was like, hey, let's watch this, and so we watched that. I got some feedback from them, but that was just a small, half a dozen people or something like that. Then I did a little bit larger test screening where I think we had 30 or 40 people there. That was kind of the last, okay. So after that, I did do some other, at that point, I kind of started after that I still called a test screening. But then after I got like the initial pass of sound back from the sound studio, I did a couple of, I called them sneak previews. And for the most part, the film was pretty set at that point. You know, I did, I think there were maybe a few very minor things that I heard from people afterwards, that I made a couple of little tiny tweaks, but that was pretty well set. We did also we actually commissioned an online test screening. I did that through a company called Cinema Cloudworks, or iScreening Room. They're connected, I think, whatever. Anyway. But that was actually at that stage, it was really too late to make major changes. Had we gotten any huge, any feedback of, just consistent, lots of people saying like, oh, I'm confused here, or, oh, I didn't like this part or whatever. We maybe would have looked at like, okay, is there a way we can fix that? Thankfully, we didn't. For the most part at that stage, we actually were getting that more just to get, that was just kind of proof of viability.
Okay.
In a way,
Yeah.
we were, because the test screenings before had been me, and other people associated with the film, getting people together that we knew. And so, of course, there's always going to be some bias there,
right.
Yeah. There's people are like,
yeah.
So, oh, it's the best, and you're like, well, is it really, or are you just saying that because
I love
we
lamp.
love it because we love you.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Do you love the lamp, or are you just saying it because you see the lamp there?
Exactly. Yeah.
So at what point in time, Our Church Thinks We're Dating was not the original title. The original title was, is this a big secret or anything?
No.
The original title was Lying to Me, which I love. I think very clever.
Lying together. Yeah.
Lying together.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Man, I cannot get titles today.
The very earliest drafts of the script, I think, just had a placeholder title. It was called like Christian Singles Movie or something like that. But then, yeah, at one point I woke up one morning and went, Lying Together. That's a great title, and so that for a very long time, that was in fact, that was what was on the shooting script and everything. And we really liked it. It's kind of cheeky. It's got a fun double entendre and so on. And that's fun. I really liked that. Once we started talking to potential distributors, one of the first things that we heard from virtually all of them was, is that the final title?
Oh, wow.
Are you open to title changes? Now, the cynic in me says, I think maybe distributors just have a pathological need to change titles to assert their control. But, and with some of them, we got, it was like inconsistent things that we heard about why they didn't like it or what they wanted to change it to or whatever. And so it was like, well, okay, like, I'm not hearing consistent things from anybody. So like, that's not, if I was hearing the same thing from everybody, then that was, but the one thing that I was hearing consistently was lots of people wanted to change the title. Now there was somebody that I talked to, that gave me what I thought really was quite good advice. So on the one hand, they said, for the title Lying Together, they said, hey, I'm concerned that this may turn off your target audience, and then sort of stated, sort of more broadly, he said, especially when you're talking about a low budget, indie film, he said, don't run away from your target audience, and he said, okay, you may say like, okay, yeah, you tried to make this to appeal to, a broader audience, but your core audience for the, it's a romantic comedy that is, faith. We oftentimes use the term faith friendly because it's not quite as preachy as like some of the faith-based movies from like 10 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
But and so we did try to make it like that was kind of the primary audience, but we tried to make it accessible to people so that it wouldn't just turn people off who weren't who weren't churchgoers or whatever. But that was the core audience, and he said, hey, don't, like, that's your core audience, don't run away from them. He said, and or stated positively, he said, make sure you get the low-hanging fruit first. He said, when you're talking about if it's a big Hollywood feature, they've got a massive marketing budget behind it, you can afford to educate your audience. Everybody in America will know what the movie Holes is about.
Yeah.
Right.
But if it's a low budget movie and it's and it's just holes, you're like, I don't know what
like
that's...
nothing.
Yeah.
I never thought of that, but a title has to do a lot more work when it's on a lower budget.
Yep.
Yeah.
He said, your two most, on a low budget, most people, their only exposure to your movie is seeing it on the streaming service or whatever. And so they see the artwork and they see the title. And you need those two things to get somebody to click on it. And then maybe they watch their, your trailer and read the log line or something like that. But,
well, it's really interesting. You see the title, you see the logo for the title, the two most prominent words on it, church, dating. So, if you just run your eyes across it, you say, oh, this is, something romantic that has to do with church people. Okay, that aligns with my interests and values. Let's give it a shot. Yeah,
exactly. Yep. Yeah. That was, even the design of it is deliberate for that reason. It's like, okay, get that attention there. And so, it's not quite as, it's not as fun, it's not as clever as Lying Together. And I, and I like the cast and the crew, they go, oh, we like the original time. Yeah, I know, I do too. But like, and there's certain things, like I'm not going to compromise the story,
Right.
But the title, that's like, I can change that, and one of the things that was very convincing was we did some testing on Facebook. So we did Facebook Labs experiments where we took the same poster artwork, did like 5 different title variants. So one of them was Lying Together, one was the original. And then we did some that were kind of that were pretty Christmas oriented, like Mischief and Mistletoe. And because that was one thing that some people said, like, oh, you got to put a Christmas reference in the title, or what else? I don't know, I can't even remember, but and then Our Church Thinks We're Dating, was one of them. And that one, Our Church Thinks We're Dating, and so then we're just measuring based on that, so we had, the poster pops up there, and then if people sit on it for like 5 seconds, then it starts playing the trailer, and then I have a button there that says like watch more or something like that, so I'm trying to get as close as I can to sort of the experience that somebody would have. I mean, aside from, I guess, the trailer starting to play, but the experience that somebody would have on a streaming platform, where they just see the title, and that if they click on it, they can watch more, and so I'm trying to kind of mimic that and see, like, honestly, kind of trying to fool people, making them think if I click this, I will be able to watch this movie, to see what gets people saying, I want to watch that movie. Yeah. And it was pretty dramatic. Like that title, Our Church Thinks We're Dating, performed like 40% better than the next closest one.
Wow.
Yeah. In terms of like the number of clicks or the cost per click, so
clear winner.
Yeah. It's hard to argue with that, especially when it's like, we don't have a massive marketing budget. And then to say, okay, if I do this, I'm going to get 40% more people clicking on it. Yeah. Let's go with that title.
Kind of a no-brainer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did the Mischief and Mistletoe and Lying Together? Where did they end up in the
Yeah. Lying
together?
Together was about in the middle.
Okay.
I don't know. I'd have to
Yeah, no,
pull up the
that's good. Yeah,
results.
I was just
Yeah.
wondering, but still, from number 4, from number 2 to number 1 was a 40% gap.
Yep.
That's
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, you can't deny that. That's
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And if you think about it, it almost works like a mini log line.
it
You
does.
know,
It
Mhm.
does.
people. I know some people are like, oh, it's so on the nose. I'm like, well, it's not quite as on. It definitely implies some questions.
Right. I think that when Darby and I had this conversation that a lot of there's a history with rom-coms where that's kind of the title. When Harry Met Sally. You know what
Mhm.
you're getting, right? My
Mhm.
Big Fat Greek Wedding. You know what
Right.
you're getting. Like not every rom-com, but if you look through a lot of the classic ones, that's kind of how their titles go.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
think
Yep.
you're in a good area
You're in
there.
good company.
Yeah.
I didn't have this language for it at the time. This is now since then working with a guy on advertising stuff.
Mhm.
But he said we're always trying to create open loops with advertising. So the title, is an example of that, and the title creates a little bit of an open loop. You see that. When Harry met Sally. Well,
Mhm.
when Harry met Sally, what
What?
what
Yeah.
happened?
Yeah.
Our
Yep.
church thinks we're dating. Oh, your church
And
thinks you're dating, but you're not. Wait, what do
right.
you mean? Like, what's,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yep.
Yeah, crazed curiosity.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yep.
The same thing with the log line. We spent some time, so I had, and I didn't recite it word for word exactly what we came up with when I told you before that elevator pitch there,
Mhm.
but that was pretty close. And part of it was that end piece was that we added that question. Will they end up together, or will they, will it destroy their friendship or whatever? Creating that so that when people are looking at it, it comes up in the advertising. It creates that question.
Mhm.
We tested different with the advertising. We tested different thumbnails, different just screen grabs from the movie, to see what would, before the trailer plays. Because when people are scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or whatever, initially it's just going to show that thumbnail, and so you're trying to break,
Stop the
break.
scroll.
Exactly. Stop the scroll. Yeah. And so you're trying to find something that catches their attention, that's out of the ordinary, that has that open loop, that they're like, wait, what's going on there? And so the one that, so we tested, 5 different thumbnails from the movie to see what was going to do that the best. And yeah, the one that did that the best was that one from is a scene where the stable is collapsing and everybody's holding it up. And so yeah, you can kind of get that everybody's just like,
There's
what?
like some danger in there, implied danger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Movement. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
The second best, and it wasn't all that far behind, but it was, there was definitely a statistically significant gap. Was it was when Sam is taking Rachel to the Christmas store, and he's covering her eyes. Where, and she says, "Where are you taking me?" So it was just that shot of him covering her eyes. And
Mhm.
so yeah, I think kind of oh, why is he covering her eyes?
Yeah.
What's
Mhm.
the
What's he hiding from her?
exactly?
Again,
Yeah.
it's a visually creating that open loop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's smart.
So we're kind of coming up on the 2 hour mark here, and I want to honor your time because thank you so much for coming in and spilling
You're
all the
welcome.
beans on this. The
Yeah.
movie
Thank you.
is in theaters right now. You said during that Q&A that it's going to go on kind of a natural run that you see with movies all the time, where it goes to theaters, then it's going to eventually hit a rental, and then hopefully maybe streaming on a free
Yep.
platform.
Mm-hmm.
That just follow that delineation down. Is that all through a distributor? Are they taking care of all of that?
Yeah. So yeah. Now this is an interesting. So yes, that is through a distributor. So we're our distribution is through a company called Atlas Distribution. It's actually, interestingly, the second distributor. I'm not gonna. Our first distributor. This is a thing I've heard from many people before. They just didn't do much with the film. and and their, from their perspective, they would say they did their job, which was to go to some film markets and have it listed and available on their website for platforms to pick up and stuff like that. But a lot of what are called distributors these days are actually maybe more properly called aggregators. And somebody kind of helped clear this up a little bit for me recently. It used to be that a distributor actually, in the days of physical media, a distributor distributed your DVDs or Blu-rays or VHS tapes or whatever to Walmart and, different stores and things like that, so that there was, they were physically shipping product, and they had the relationships with, all the different stores and everything like that. And so there was a real sort of tangible job that they had, and that was a thing that, the studios were like, yeah, we don't want to manage all of that. So there was a very valid reason for that. These days, many companies that call themselves distributors, but it's all happening online, and so what they pitch themselves as is, oh well, we have relationships, and that can be valuable if they really do have if they do have those good, if they have those relationships and they're going to leverage them, and I think one thing in particular that could be a good thing, you don't want a distributor that has a ton, that has a massive catalog. If they have a massive catalog, they're playing a numbers game. They're just getting a bunch of movies. They're just going to list them. They're going to go to the market, and they're going to say, hey, here are all the movies that I have, and then, the buyer says, well, we need to fill up our, we don't have enough stuff yet for, March. So, we need 12 things. Can you give us, 3 comedies, 4 action films, and, 5 horrors, or whatever. And okay, here you go. And, all right, that'll be, $15,000,
Yeah.
and so, okay, great. Your movie just got $1,500, so, that really is, that's more of an aggregator, that they're not, frankly, they're not really doing a lot,
Yeah.
and if you're willing to do the work, you can do that stuff yourself. You can use a true aggregator like Film Hub or Indie Film Rights or something like that. And they can get your stuff on these platforms, and they'll take a smaller percentage than what the distributor that is actually an aggregator would take. Or if you're willing to do the work, you can get on some of these platforms yourself. Some of them, anyway. Some of them you can't. Some of them you need. But even then, so I actually had the other thing. It's constantly changing, and especially right now, distribution is in a huge amount of flux. Like everybody's trying to figure it out. The subscription-based streamers are like, that business model is kind of collapsing to some degree, and yeah, it's like nobody quite knows what it's going to look like in a couple of years, and it's changing very rapidly. So anyway, so like the guy, for instance, that I'm working with now on advertising stuff has said, and I wasn't aware of this. Like I said, it's all changing very rapidly, and so some of this stuff I found some valuable stuff on Stage 32. But I'm still learning stuff. Oh gosh, I wish I had known that when I had first gotten to this distribution stage. He said there are distribution consultants that, instead of taking a percentage, it's just a flat fee, and so you can hire them, and then they will just, they will simply place your film on these platforms. You can get it. Now, I'm not talking Well, actually, I think it even is true with Amazon Prime. Actually, Amazon Prime has a pretty, if you have your movie listed on Amazon Digital, I think you can just say, I want this to be available on Amazon Prime.
Oh, wow.
You will hardly make anything. They pay like, pennies per hour viewed or something like that, so you're not, but they're like, sure, if you want to give your movie away to free for people, we won't stop you. So you're better off there going with like Freevee, their ad supported one, because then you actually will get paid something based on the ad views. But yeah, many of these, like, you just need somebody that will place it there, or like, for instance, you go through there are quality check houses, for instance, that are approved by like the Apple movie store, for instance. Now, I'm not talking like Apple TV Plus, not the streaming platform. I'm talking just the, sales and rentals on the Apple movie store, what used to be called the iTunes movie store, and so they have approved quality assurance partners. And so I think in many cases you can just go to them, say, hey, I need you to do the QC, and then place it on the, and as long as it passes, then they can place it on the store for you, so in many cases, if the distributor is not really going to do anything, and they don't really have like these phenomenal connections that are really going to pay off, then really they're just kind of an aggregator, and they're just taking a percentage kind of for no reason. I mean, just they're just in the middle taking a cut, Now it's hard work to go around that. In the case of the particular distributor that I'm doing, well, they do have some stuff that they're doing, and so I feel a little better about that. The new one that I have, the original one was more like what I was just describing, but the new one that I have, they have placed it in theaters, and you mentioned in theaters. Now we're kind of approaching the end of that. There may be a few more that they're going to place it in, but yeah, as of right now, I think there are only 2 upcoming that it's still showing in. Okay. There's some more that they're working on that it may be in, but anyway, we'll see what happens here.
Okay. So it's moving quick.
It's moving quick, yeah. Well, and it's a low budget indie film. It's not like to get a wide release. To even 1,000 theaters is actually not that's kind of a small wide release or whatever. But that would be, you need to pay for booking it and all of those, which costs some money. Although that, again, you can hire a theatrical booker directly, which is a new thing that I learned that I didn't know you can do. And you're just paying them a flat amount per theater that they book it in, instead of like a percentage of ticket sales or something like that. But that's not going to do you any good if you're not advertising it. You're going to pay a bunch of money to get the movie in 1,000 theaters, and nobody's going to see it.
Yeah. Right.
So anyway, so Atlas, and then their brand family movie events, they're doing a limited release, in some theaters that, a lot of them are kind of small town theaters and things like that, where they know they have an audience for, this like family friendly stuff and things like that. And so in their case, they have those connections, and they are putting some valid work into it and everything. So I feel more comfortable with, okay, yeah, you guys deserve a percentage. Right. And they're working hard. They're doing, it's a night and day difference between that and the first distributor, who shall remain nameless. But yeah, if some of this stuff, like I said, you can do yourself, and especially, yeah, it's, if they're not going to put some of that work into it, if they're not putting in some advertising, or they're not doing this, or they're placing it in some theaters or something like that, like, yeah, just, do the work to do it yourself. Don't
do
give
the work.
somebody else. Yeah, do the work. Yep.
that comes back up again as a theme.
Yeah. Yep. Man, that's the theme. So I guess as we close out, what is the best way, say now to next year, to the beginning of next year, what is the best way to see Our Church Thinks We're Dating?
You got it.
Yeah. I got it, because on this website, ourchurchthinkswe'redating.com. And so if you go there, you can see theaters. There are a number that are listed right now that I think are not actually showing it because there's some possibility they may bring it back, but we don't know yet. Our distributor is trying to nail that down. That's part of the deal because it's a smaller release. There's more flexibility there. So the theaters may kind of fill it in, like, oh, we've got an opening here, you know, whatever. We'll put it there. So that's, you can find out theaters. The only two I know of for sure that are showing it right now are in Longmont, Colorado, and then Indiana. I can't remember the city in Indiana. It's be opening the 25th. There are a couple others they're maybe working on, and then, like I said, some of the others on the list it may come back to. We don't know for sure yet. But you can sign up for like a newsletter there. There's also like a demand form where you can say, I would like this to be in a theater near me. And then that gives them some ammunition so that hopefully they can go and say, hey, we get people, you know, getting people out here. But if nothing else, you know, then they'll let you know if it does show up in a theater near you. Mm-hmm. And if nothing else, then when it ends up on streaming, which is going to be sooner rather than later, because once we're done with theaters, there's no reason to wait around.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, Tim, thank you again so much for coming on to the show and spending this time with us and telling us all of the ins and outs. Very funny movie, very fun time. So definitely, if you can't see it in the theater, get a watch party going. Get your friends and family there to check it out. I'm Darby Ellis Lewis Wilson. This is Chris Anonymous. This is the awesome director, an awesome guy, Tim Nolte. Thank you again for coming out. We will be back next month with Christmas Fair as we continue with our holiday extravaganza. And we will see you next time. Peace out. Bye, everybody.